I think a lot of times the pitfalls become when the personal injury lawyer is going straight ahead on their case and they're not paying attention to what's going on in the workers' compensation side of it, whether or not the employee is not getting great care, or, they're still under treatment and they try to settle the case, or, just all of those things that when you have both cases, which you often do, that you have to coordinate and communicate with that workers' compensation lawyer. When you're dealing with the workers' compensation law, sometimes it's hard to navigate and know all of these rules and what is the best thing for your client, or what's the best thing for you once you've been injured.
Today, I'm excited to have Krysten LeFavour as our guest. Kristen is an attorney who handles all types of things, but one of the areas that she does a lot of work in and is extraordinarily knowledgeable in is workers' compensation. And I'm real excited to have her here to talk about workers' compensation and the effects workers' compensation has on large cases. This is After the Crash. I'm attorney Dave Craig, managing partner and one of the founders of the law firm of Craig, Kelley Faultless. I've represented people who have been seriously injured or who have had a family member killed in a semi or other big truck wreck for over 30 years. Following the wreck, their lives are chaos. Often they don't even know enough about the process to ask the right questions. It is my goal to empower you by providing you with the information you need to protect yourself and your family. In each and every episode, I will interview top experts and professionals that are involved in truck wreck cases. This is After the Crash. Krysten had her undergraduate degree in social work. She graduated with honors. She then went on to law school, and in law school, she graduated summa cum laude, the highest honors you can graduate with. And she also did law review. She did moot court. She did a little bit of everything while she still raised a family and worked. So she's truly an amazing person, and I really look up to Krysten. She is licensed in Indiana and in the state of Kentucky. She is a frequent speaker on the topic of workers' compensation. She was rated as a super lawyer, rising star, and for several years. And I'm real excited to have her here today to talk about workers' compensation and the effects workers' compensation has on large cases. I'm involved in huge cases that involve semi-truck drivers that are negligent and injure people, as well as other large cases. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the interrelationship of workers' compensation law and personal injury law. And that's why I invited Krysten to be a guest. Welcome, Krysten.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start off, I guess, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you were actually a judge in Indiana in the workers' comp area, and you did that for several years, for like 12 years. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a judge, how that helped you and helped make you a better lawyer in this area of expertise.
Yeah, so I actually worked at the Indiana Workers' Compensation Board starting my first year of law school. I was what would be looked at like a law clerk there. I was a policy analyst, and I handled everything from helping the judges to looking up law, and always made sure that I wanted to learn everything that I could. I probably read every workers' compensation case back to 1920. And when there was a political change in about 2006, I was appointed as the executive administrator, which is the head of the administrative board of the agency. And then when I graduated from law school, I was appointed as one of the youngest judges ever in the state of Indiana in workers' compensation. My area was Southeast Indiana. I covered all cases, all disputed cases in Southeast Indiana. And I would hear those cases between an employee and an employer if they had a dispute over workers' compensation. So I really feel like that prepared me to represent injured workers, because I saw a lot of the pitfalls of them navigating this system where they didn't know the rules. And the rules are pretty particular here in Indiana about workers' compensation. So I retired in 2018 to represent solely injured workers before the Indiana Workers' Compensation Board.
And Krysten, as a judge, it has to be, a judge, it has to be kind of heartbreaking sometimes. You're actually listening to these people making determinations. And I know, there's an appellate process, and then I know periodically you'd have to meet with a full board. And I would think that would definitely enlighten you. And because that's experiences that I've never had. I would have no idea what it is like to sit there and make the decisions and have to base your decisions on the law. And then have to make decisions that you're comfortable with, that when you go in front of the full board or when it goes up to a court of appeals, that you made a solid decision.
Yeah, it was definitely, I used to say that you always know that you made a good decision if both people are unhappy. It's really, it's difficult. You have to look at the law, but you also, are concerned about the way that the law is being applied. And there were definitely times I was very frustrated when employers were not taking care of employees because they're injured and they're hurt and they're going through a difficult time. And they really don't need that extra added concern of dealing with the law and dealing with their employer and things not getting taken care of correctly. And the system isn't necessarily set up to quickly address those issues. I know that as judges, there was 7 of us in the entire state of Indiana. So, we held hearings in different counties, but only once or twice a year. So that means for injured workers, they can really have a difficulty navigating that system. But then you also want to be fair to, the law and making sure that it's applied correctly. And, working with the state as well, with the government and making sure that you're a good public servant to the state of Indiana. And, it was definitely an experience on how the workers' compensation system works and knowing the ins and out of that on top of just knowing the law.
And I know, I first met you while you were still being still a judge in workers' comp world. And we were very fortunate. We didn't do workers' comp at our firm at that time. And so you were able to come work with us almost like an internship, kind of like a learning personal injury law on top of, what you were already doing and serving as a judge. And we had, you joined us of counsel and when you retired from the board and you now handle other types of cases with us as well as workers' comp, which I think kind of helps round out everything. It kind of helps round out your experience. So it's not just workers' comp. You have that extra expertise that most lawyers don't have, but then you also get to see it from a personal injury, what we call third party cases sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I handle cases here with Kelley and Faultless personal injury cases that are in what we call pre-suit or pre-litigation, as well as workers' compensation cases. I handle all the workers' compensation cases from what we would call suit into the litigation process. And then, of course, there are cases that are both, where there is a personal injury aspect as well as a workers' compensation aspect, because you don't have to have either or. Employees as injured people may have both claims depending on how or when they were injured.
And I think it is helpful to the listeners. I mean, the audience here is, this podcast is designed for the average everyday person, not the lawyers, not the judges. It's designed for everyday people, because I believe that power is, giving people information is power. And the more information we can provide to people, the more power they have. So there's a lot of these people that are listening to this that have no idea what workers' compensation is, and they have no idea what we're talking about so far. So why don't you tell us briefly, what is workers' compensation law? What is that? What is workers' compensation, and what are the benefits? How does it work?
Yes. So workers' compensation is a system wherein if you're injured at work or in the course of your employment, which is a big legal word, but it essentially usually means at work, or while you're doing work duties. Like if you're a traveling employee, a delivery driver, it's when you're on the road. But it's a system, a statutory system that was created to provide people who are injured at work with benefits and compensation for their injury. So they're entitled to medical benefits. They're entitled to mileage on the way to their medical appointment if it's outside of the county. They're entitled to disability benefits, so temporary total disability. And then at the end of their claim, once they get to a point of permanence, then they may be entitled to permanent partial impairment. So that's a percentage amount that then corresponds to a monetary amount to compensate you for functional loss. And finally, you may be completely disabled or permanently and totally disabled. And then there's up to 500 weeks of your disability benefits that would be owed. So it's a statutory system. And the benefit of it is, number one, the employee does not have to show negligence. So in a personal injury case, we have to show that someone was negligent or did something wrong. Whereas in workers' compensation, you don't have to show that the employer did anything wrong. And even if the employee may have had some fault, it doesn't make a difference. Those words don't come into the workers' compensation system, except in a couple of small, a little bit of caveats, such as if an employee was intoxicated. But other than that, fault does not come into play in Indiana workers' compensation, which is the compromise. So the benefits, in my opinion, are pretty low. And we're working with the Indiana State Legislature to try and get benefits increased this year, but they're still low. But on the other hand, the employee does not have to show negligence. So it's a compromise that the legislature made to hopefully get more people benefits, but then also lower benefits. The things that you're not entitled to under workers' compensation are things like pain and suffering, which is the biggest one that oftentimes people are frustrated and concerned about, which understandably so. But that's the compromise that was made. And every state in the United States has a workers' compensation system. Texas actually made it recently an opt-out. But other than that, every state has workers' compensation available for injured employees.
And I would imagine that the benefits and the flexibility varies from state to state.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things here in Indiana, which is, I think, frustrating, is that the employer gets to pick the physician. So there are other states where the employee still gets to pick their doctor and the employer has to pay for it. There are also some states where the employer can put out a panel, so 3 different doctors, and then the injured person gets to pick from at least those 3 doctors. But here in Indiana, the employer or their insurance company gets to direct you to the physician that they choose. Now, one of the things that's really important, and I think that I have to companies, is that even though they get to choose the doctor, they don't get to choose the care. Once they choose the doctor, then that doctor and what they say that the employee or the injured person needs is what they need to provide. So if a doctor says they need an MRI, then the employer needs to send them for an MRI. They can't question that, although they try quite frequently. There's a pretty big case here in Indiana that makes it really clear. It's called Young versus Marling, that they are not allowed to then question the treating physician's recommendations.
Well, and so so kind of to summarize, so in my world, where I'm suing people who are negligent, and negligence is kind of as a legal word, but we all have a duty of reasonable care. And when somebody violates that duty of reasonable care and they're careless, then if they hurt somebody, then that person is the person who does the damage is responsible for paying for the harm caused to the victim. So a semi-tractor trailer runs a red light, and that's negligent. That's not reasonable. A reasonable person stops at a red light. But a semi-tractor trailer driver runs a red light and hits a car, then that driver, that semi, and the trucking company, if that semi driver is within the scope of his employment, is responsible to the victim in the car for all the damage and harm that is caused by that wreck. But what you're telling us, workers' comp world, even if I'm negligent and I'm an employee, so if the employee goes into to work and sees a puddle of water on the floor, and it has a wet floor sign right there by that puddle of water, but that employee is working, doing their job and carrying something, and maybe a reasonable person would have seen the puddle, but this employee doesn't and slips and falls, so they're not acting reasonably, they still recover in the workers' comp world, correct?
Correct. It's actually even more common is a one-car motor vehicle accident. So you're working for your employer, maybe even as a police officer, or you're working for your employer as a delivery truck driver, and you are looking at your phone, not paying attention, and you run off the road. The employer, even though it's technically your fault that the accident happened, that you're still entitled to workers' compensation because you were injured in the course of your employment or while working.
Okay. And so, and although the benefits are smaller, the nice thing about it is that they get compensated no matter what, typically.
Way too small, in my opinion. But yes, I mean, you get limited benefits, and it should also be easier. One of the things I say all the time is that injured workers actually shouldn't have to call an attorney. It should be automatic. They should be getting their benefits right off the bat. Nobody should be, harassing them about getting their medical. They shouldn't have to ask for their temporary total disability. They should be getting their mileage. And in a perfect world, that would all happen automatically. Quite frequently, unfortunately, it isn't. And you have to call insurance companies multiple times to get your benefits. But yes, that's the pro of workers' compensation, is that you don't have to prove negligence, and it should be easier. Whereas with a negligence claim or a personal injury claim, you have to prove negligence. And sometimes it can be a process going through litigation or even pre-suit to prove your damages.
Now, I, even though I don't represent injured workers, I mean, I only represent folks in normal negligence cases when someone else is careless and hurts them. Workers' comp is often involved, even in my world. And I've been practicing for over 35 years, and I've had a lot of cases that involved a person that was working, but they were injured by someone else that was negligent. That was not his or her employer. And I think I want to talk about one of the trickiest things up front for young lawyers or lawyers who don't normally do this area is that there is this rule that if you settle a case, first of all, you have to pay back the workers' comp, what workers' comp has paid. So workers' comp pays your medical bills. They pick your doctors, like you talked about. They pay the medical bills. They pay maybe some disability or some of these other things you talked about. But they're entitled to be paid back because it's not the employer's fault. It's this third party, this other entity's, this other person's fault. And so they're entitled to be paid back. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, that's called subrogation. But a lot of people, I know clients are always shocked when they have to either pay back their health insurance or they have to pay back the workers' comp carrier from this settlement that they get from the third. So talk a little bit about subrogation in the workers' comp world.
Yeah, and that is really important that you have an attorney that's knowledgeable in both workers' compensation and personal injury, because this is one of the biggest pitfalls. With subrogation, if the employer pays for, they're paying for a subset of your total damages, but we claim the total damages in a personal injury claim. So that means that subset gets to be paid back to the employer, although it doesn't mean that they get 100%. And that's part of it, is that, we can negotiate with them to pay back a reduced amount. Because if, let's say, there was a comparative fault issue, the question as to who was 100% at fault, we may argue that the employer should get back less of their money, so that our clients are entitled to more out of the total amount from the negligent party. But it's really important, because your right to negotiate those is cut off if you don't get permission from the workers' compensation carrier before you settle your case on the personal injury. So you may be losing a lot of negotiation leverage as well as money for your client if you don't go through the steps that are required. So the statute says that unless you're willing to pay 100% of your money you got on the third party over to the employer and make them whole, then you have to get permission in writing prior to settling your third party case. And that, a lot of times, we negotiate with the personal injury insurance carrier or the negligent party, and we get a settlement that's contingent, and then we work with workers' comp. So, it's a process sometimes, but it's certainly something that, your attorney should be aware of, so that they don't get into that pitfall and potentially lose some of the settlement funds that you're entitled to for your damages and the things that you went through.
Yeah, and I remember when I was a brand new young lawyer, I didn't have anybody really to teach me personal injury law. So I was kind of learning it on my own. And I probably shouldn't admit this, but I settled a case that had a workers' comp benefits, and I didn't know that what you're talking about. And since then, and so I remember then after I settled the case, Then I looked up and I'm like, uh-oh, boy, did I mess up because I didn't get permission in writing from the workers' comp carrier. So now I'm going to owe them more money because I'm not going to be able to negotiate with them and get a reduction. And that's a lesson. I mean, this was when I very first started practicing. It's a lesson that I never forgot and that I've taught all my young attorneys that work for me. But it's a horrible feeling and sinking feeling in your gut because I would have made it whole for my client. My client wouldn't have lost anything, but it would have came out of my pocket. But luckily, when I called the workers' comp carrier, they laughed and they negotiated with me anyway. So there was no harm done. But it is a huge problem if you're a lawyer out there who does general practice in a smaller community and you have no idea, and they could come back to haunt and hurt your client or the attorney.
Well, and I think the other thing to think about is that not only is there a subrogation issue, but once you settle that third party case, it terminates your right to any future workers' compensation. So one of the things we often think about is that the personal injury claim and the negligence claim is worth more than the workers' compensation claim. However, in the state of Indiana, we have minimum limits on auto insurance. So let's say it's a motor vehicle accident. And, I had a client who was horribly injured when he was mowing grass on the side of the street for his employer. And there was only $25,000 in insurance from the vehicle that hit him. So in that circumstance, there's no point in taking the $25,000 in insurance without going to the workers' compensation carrier first, because if you did, then it terminates their right to medical benefits, which could be, into the millions. Based on how catastrophic these losses can be. And so, in that case, oftentimes we can go to the employer or their insurance carrier and say, hey, let's waive this part of the law that says that you can terminate the benefits under workers' comp so that we can accept any kind of third party funds and then work out a deal as to who gets what portion of that. But again, that's a really important thing because you could hurt your client quite a bit by terminating workers' compensation benefits in the middle of their treatment.
And I think that's critically important for the person out there who's listening, because if you happen to get hurt and you're on the job, you're within the scope of your employment, and you get hurt and you have catastrophic injuries, and let's say a box truck or a gravel truck or a dump truck or a semi or 18-wheeler or whatever, or any other way injures you, then the reality is you need a lawyer that handles personal injury, who's knowledgeable on how to get you the best recovery that you can get. But you also need somebody that knows the workers' comp side, because that can be just as important to your future as having the right personal injury lawyer. So you need that combination. You need somebody that has the knowledge of both areas, or that you need two lawyers working together. And it's critical that they work together and not independently, that they communicate, they talk, and they work together. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree. Absolutely. I would agree.
Now, one of the challenges is in workers' comp world is that, and you mentioned it earlier, is that the employer gets to pick the doctor.
Could you tell I was frustrated about that?
Yeah. And I think
one of my least favorite parts of the law.
Yeah. And I think we need to talk about that a little bit in that, because a lot of people are shocked that, their employer says they'll send them to a clinic to begin with, and then that clinic will send them out. So let's talk about a little bit about the fact that they get to pick a doctor. Is it just a general practitioner? Do they have to send them to, like, if they have a shoulder injury, they have to send them to a specialized doctor? I mean, how does that work? How does the employer pick the doctors or the insurance company?
Yeah, I would say a lot of employers now or insurance companies have urgent care type clinics that, or sports medicine type clinics that they send their employees to first. So a Concentra or, any kind of urgent care clinic out there that they send them to evaluate them. And then that doctor may decide if they need physical therapy or if they need a specialist. So then they may send them on to a specialist, like an orthopedic specialist or a surgeon, or they may get imaging. But oftentimes it does start off at that urgent care clinic to be the quarterback of all of their care. And I'm not saying that in workers' comp, all of the doctors are not the greatest. But I would say that on average, they're probably a little bit more conservative. So they're definitely going to start off with more conservative treatment, and escalate from there. And I think that that's important because in, personal injury cases, you want to make sure that they're getting the best care so that that evidence of what, they went through is available when we're negotiating a case with the negligent party. So oftentimes I know that in my practice and with Craig, Kelley, and Faultless is that when we have a party that is maybe injured and they have a personal injury claim, but they also have a workers' compensation claim, which you can't have both, then it may be important to send them to another doctor, just to make sure that the care is going correctly, that there aren't any other things that could benefit the injured worker, and to make sure that we have our own expert that's only there for the employee and not just there for the employer or their insurance carrier.
And I think that's that's an important part. And I don't see a lot of lawyers doing this. We at Craig, Kelley, and Faultless, we handle significant cases in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, and Illinois, and throughout the country. But those are the main states that we practice in. And we had an Ohio case where a client had a traumatic brain injury, and workers' comp doctors said that the person was had gotten as good as he's going to get, and that he was capable of going back to work. And this guy happened to drive a truck, semi-tractor trailer, but he was hit by another 18-wheeler. And he was hit hard in Indiana, had a severe brain injury, and the Ohio doctors wanted to put him back to work, and he was not capable of functioning. In that case, we actually had him examined and tested. We actually sent him out to the East Coast to one of the top medical facilities for brain injuries in the country, and they tested him and found that he should not be driving. He shouldn't be driving a car, let alone a semi. And that report, we were able to do that. And with the workers' comp lawyer, we were able to give that report. We were doing it in our third party case. We were doing it in our case against the semi driver who rear-ended him. But that report, we gave it to the workers' comp doctor or lawyer over in Ohio. And then that lawyer was able to get the benefits reinstated and was able to continue to get him treatment. And I just think that again, like we talked about, is the importance of the workers' comp lawyer and the third party lawyer like myself to work together and to have medical examinations so that they can help the workers' comp lawyer with their case and their claim.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that coordination and that communication is key. I think a lot of times the pitfalls become when the personal injury lawyer is going straight ahead on their case and they're not paying attention to what's going on in the workers' compensation side of it, whether or not the employee is not getting great care, or, they're still under treatment and they try to settle the case, or, just all of those things that when you have both cases, which you often do, that you have to coordinate and communicate with that workers' compensation lawyer so that the employee or the injured person is taken care of and maximizes really their benefits on both sides of it, on the personal injury side and on the workers' compensation side. So I think it's very, very important to have that communication, or at the very least knowledge about how workers' compensation works so that you can take appropriate steps to protect your clients.
And as you alluded to it earlier, now because of that case and other cases like that, here at Craig, Kelley, and Faultless, what we do is whenever we have a significant case where the person was working and there's a workers' comp claim, we now get them examined by an independent medical doctor in the very beginning. And that it's good for our clients too, because it gives them a second opinion. So even if the workers' comp doctors are great doctors and she or he does, provides proper care, it's reassuring to our clients to know, hey, another doctor's looking at this. And if it's good care, they can confirm that it's good care. They can tell them what should be doing. And then we can then give that to the workers' comp lawyer or use that in the workers' comp claim to help our client get additional treatment or to at least verify. And we've actually even, we'll get them examined in the very beginning. And then every time there's a key examination being done by the workers' comp board or workers' comp doctors, we then send them back to the IME at the same time so that they're comparing apples to apples. They're examining the patient at close to the same time frame. So the symptoms should be the same, the problem should be the same, and hopefully the diagnosis and treatment plan is the same or close.
That's a huge benefit. I don't think that I know of many other firms that handle it that way. I think they just, allow the employee to go ahead and get the care through workers' compensation, and they don't deal with it until the end, until they're at what we call maximum medical improvement. So having that knowledge and working with the workers' compensation lawyer, I think is really important. I think one of the other issues as far as having knowledge of the workers' compensation system is just identifying that you may have more than one type of case. I mean, that's one of the pitfalls I've seen lawyers fall into, where, they get a case in and they think all it is workers' compensation. And there may be other types of cases, whether it's a negligence case, a personal injury case, a uninsured motorist case, or a products liability case. I mean, there's multiple different cases where you're going to have two different kinds of cases, a workers' comp and a third party case. And that can get a little bit complicated in and of itself, because there are times where we're arguing that it isn't workers' comp. So, I had a case recently where the person that I was representing was in a vehicle that with a person, they were independent contractors, and the person who was driving was at fault. Now, if it's under workers' comp, you might get less benefits, and you can't sue a co-employee in negligence. So we were arguing in that case that he was an independent contractor based on all of the facts, so that we could then make a negligence or a third party case. So it's interesting because these things really get a little complicated and hard to navigate. And again, I think going back to where I started is that, when you're dealing with the workers' compensation law, sometimes it's hard to navigate and know all of these rules and what is the best thing for your client, or what's the best thing for you once you've been injured.
Yeah, and you alluded to it, and I want to talk a little bit more about uninsured motorist cases. So another problem that I see is sometimes when a person gets hurt on the job, lawyers assume, and there's nobody else to sue. They can't find anybody else to sue. Then they assume that it's just a workers' comp claim and there's no other claim. And we handled a case not long ago where employees were delivering mattresses, and it was a driver and a new trainee who was being trained, and they got to an overpass, and the overpass was too low, and the box truck they were driving wouldn't go under the overpass, and it was night. So the driver asked the new employee to get out and help back him up so that he could turn around in the roadway. Well, as she was behind the box truck, a car came out of nowhere and hit her, and severely injured, caused a major brain injury and caused her severe injuries. But unfortunately, that car took off and fled, and they didn't have a license plate. It was not in an area where there were any security cameras. The driver of the vehicle only saw the color of the car, but didn't even know what kind of car it was. They filed a police report, but they never were able to find, even though there was a little bit of the car there, they never were able to find the car. And so that case was referred to us to take a look at. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of lawyers, unfortunately, and a lot of people out there think, well, I got hurt in the job. The car's disappeared. There's nobody for me to sue. I'm out of luck. I just only can get my workers' comp benefits. And in fact, that's not true, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, in that case, and one of the types of claims you can make is what's called an uninsured motorist claim. So the vehicle that they were in that she'd just gotten out of, she would potentially have a claim for her personal injuries. An uninsured motorist policy stands in the shoes of the negligent person. So the person who fled that was actually at fault, that uninsured motorist policy, which may be on that truck, is just the same as a negligence claim. You get the same damages. So she would have a workers' compensation claim, which means she's going to get her benefits up front, her medical and her temporary total disability, potentially a PPI. But then she can also make a claim for uninsured motorist against the vehicle's policy for her truck, for the work vehicle. And one of the interesting caveats of workers' compensation is that although there may be subrogation on that policy, if you also have your own uninsured motorist policy, your personal uninsured motorist policy, you may have a claim against them as well, and they don't have subrogation. So it's interesting because you got to look for all of these different claims. I used to teach a lot. Well, I still do teach the lawyers at the law school, workers' compensation. I teach a couple classes. Unfortunately, they deal with adjunct professors, and one of the things that we always teach them is make all the claims. Like, make sure you're going through all of the different kinds of claims, because you don't want to go past the statute of limitations because you didn't think, oh, there's a workers' compensation claim element on this one, or, oh, there's an uninsured motorist claim, or, oh, there's a negligence claim. You want to look through all of those potential possibilities and not just assume that you only have a workers' compensation claim. One of the other things we often look at is if you are at let's say you're a delivery driver and you go to another facility to drop something off. And maybe, they haven't iced. I mean, we're getting ready to have a huge ice storm, although this will probably come out after that's happened. But they haven't salted where snow and ice is, and you slip and fall going into that facility. You may have a premises liability claim against that company, in addition to your workers' compensation claim against your employer. So the only claim you can ever make against your employer is in workers' compensation, unless there's intentional behavior. However, you can make claims against other negligent parties, like in that incident. Or I've also had cases before where there was maybe a piece of machinery that you were using while working and it was defective. The stop button didn't work when you did the emergency stop button. Then you may have a claim against the manufacturer of that piece of machinery. There's a lot of things that go into a products liability case. But again, I think the most important thing is that, do you have an attorney that knows workers' compensation, but then also has enough knowledge to make sure, is there a third-party liability case? Is there a case against a motor vehicle driver or a semi-truck driver, or is there a case against a company for the premises liability? You just have to explore all of those different options to make sure that you're protecting your clients.
One of the last cases that I tried before COVID kind of shut the courts down was a delivery driver to a hospital up in Anderson. And the hospital, the semi-driver brought merchandise or supplies to the hospital. And he pulled up and it was icy, and the stairs to the loading dock were ice covered. And he went in and told the folks, and unfortunately on his way out, he fell. So he was injured. He aggravated a pre-existing condition in his back. And so he had workers' comp benefits that he ended up having surgery. And one second. And so the person, he got injured on the job. He walked up, he slipped and fell. So clearly he's going to get his workers' comp benefits, because regardless of whether he's at fault or not, workers' comp is going to pay that. But we looked at it, and again, that another law firm referred the case to us and said, well, what do you think? Do you think the hospital is responsible for having slippery steps? And was he less than 50% at fault in Indiana? Because if he's 50% or more than 50% at fault, he loses. So the law firm said, do you think that he's less than 50% at fault, or 50% or less? And we looked at it and said, yeah, the other side disagreed with us. So we had to go to trial. And the jury gave us around 1.7 million and reduced a little bit to fault to around 1.2, 1.3 million. And we had workers' comp actually testify in that case, the doctor testify in that case. So again, luckily other law firms looked to us and said, hey, take a look at these files. But whenever somebody's hurt on the job and it's catastrophic or it's really bad, then a personal injury lawyer with experience needs to look at it and do exactly what you said, which is look for anybody else who's responsible, any other insurance policy that might be applied. Because the worst thing is that they ask the lawyer, and the lawyer looks at these cases and they don't charge them to look at it. And they say, no, I can't help you. All you have is a workers' comp case. But on the other hand, on the case like the guy who slipped and fell, the lady, there was millions of dollars of uninsured motorist coverage. available for us. And there's other cases like sometimes the employers have big insurance policies, big uninsured policies on the vehicles that they have, especially in semi-tractor trailer cases or box truck delivery cases. And so you need to consult with not only a workers' comp lawyer, but also a lawyer who handles these third-party cases in order to be protected. And you only have a certain amount of time to do it. And unfortunately,
Right.
you have to do the investigation on the front end. And so you got to get hired quickly so you can protect your clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that, again, you always want to make those claims. You want to make sure that you get your investigation in and determine if there are any other responsible parties in addition to the workers' compensation claim. So I think it's important to have an attorney that's looking into those things, do the investigation early to get all of that information so we don't lose it, because people forget things and evidence gets lost, certainly. Yeah.
Well, and it's important. I mean, we handle semi-tractor trailer cases all over the country. And so every state has a different workers' comp law, because workers' comp is something that's state by state, and it's different in every state. And the statute of limitations is different in every state. And so one of the things that we look at is, if it's a state that we're not familiar with, we usually have you reach out and talk to somebody like yourself in the other states, and so that you can work with them so we can make sure that our clients are protected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting part is you could have a multi-jurisdictional type case. So, you may have a semi-truck accident in Indiana, but your employer is in Maryland. And so you need an attorney in Maryland to handle your workers' compensation claim, but then also to coordinate with you on, again, the medical treatment, the subrogation, when to settle, when not to settle. So every state has a different workers' compensation system. Some are better than others. Some have better benefits than others. Illinois right next to us has great benefits for workers' compensation. But you have to coordinate with all the different rules, because every system of workers' compensation is state-based. There is, other than for federal employees like USPS workers, there's a federal system. But otherwise, if you're an employee, it's just based on your state. And every state has different rules. And sometimes it's incredibly different. In Ohio, they actually have a system that's run by the state, kind of like unemployment here in Indiana, where you get your weekly checks from the Ohio Workers' Compensation Board. Whereas here in Indiana, it's a private system. So that means that the employer is getting their own insurance policy to help pay for their workers' compensation claims. They're not going through the government. The government's role is only to adjudicate. So if there's a fight between the two private parties, then they are the judge and they get to decide who wins. But other than that, the government isn't involved in providing those benefits at all, except for a couple of special programs. So, I mean, I think that it's important to have an attorney as well that's going to make sure that you may have representation in another state if you need it.
And also, the other thing about workers' comp is that we talked about the subrogation rights. You have to pay back workers' comp, but that also varies by state. And there's certainly very few states, but there are some states where that obligation is not the same as in the majority of states. I mean, there's some states where you don't have to pay it back, or the percentage is different. And so again, it's the type of thing that you have to look at from state by state, and you have to have a lawyer willing to, who knows the right questions. We have you call when I don't talk to the workers' comp lawyers in other states. You do that. And so you talk to these folks about, regardless of where they're from, if they happen to be passing through one of the states that we're licensed in, or, or if it's a bigger case and it's a semi case, we handle those all over the country. And so you look at those and you make sure that the workers' comp part of it is taken care of and handled properly. So, well, Kristen, what else, anything else that you think is important for the person? I know that we could spend weeks talking about workers' compensation.
I would encourage people to have questions about
workers' compensation to give you a call. Look on our website, ckflaw.com, and then you can find there's a really good video about Kristen that talks about who Kristen is. And I would encourage people to go to our website, look up Kristen, look at her video, look at her background, And I'm sure Kristen would be happy to answer any questions that you might have that deal with workers' comp.
Absolutely. I think, one of the important things is just remember it is a free call. I mean, give us a call. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to hire an attorney. Sometimes in workers' compensation, especially if there isn't a third party case or a negligent case, sometimes you may not need a lawyer, but it may be helpful to get a little guidance or know if everything's on the right track. So I definitely encourage people to call to ask those questions. I don't mind giving out free advice all the time.
Well, I appreciate, Kristen, you taking the time with us to be on our podcast. I feel very blessed that I have Kristen that works with us. It's good to have really good people. We at Kelley Faultless, we try to hire the best, and Kristen certainly is one of the best in this area of law. So thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is David Craig, and you've been listening to After the Crash. If you'd like more information about me or my law firm, please go to our website, ckflaw.com. Or if you'd like to talk to me, you can call 1-800-ASK-DAVID. If you would like a guide on what to do after a truck wreck, then pick up my book, Semi-Truck Wreck, A Guide for Victims and Their Families, which is available on Amazon, or you can download it for free on our website, ckflaw.com.